Welcome to the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast, where we hope to inspire you to embrace your God-given gifts, skills, and passions in order to lead with confidence. We want you to remember that you are fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God, and you are fully loved by Him.
You have been designed on purpose by God with unique gifts and passions in order to love and lead those around you. I'm your host, Esther Littlefield, a pastor's wife, business owner, mom, and writer.
And I'm Esther's co-host, Holly Kane. I'm a wife, mom, and business owner. I also write at hollykane.org, where I focus on my passion for women's ministry.
Together, we chat about important issues that Christian women leaders face. In addition, we interview other women just like you who lead in various roles, from church to community to business. Through this podcast, we offer you encouragement, tools, and resources to help you on your leadership journey. We are so glad you're here with us. Hey, friend, and welcome to the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Esther Littlefield, and I am so glad to have you with us today. Now, if you listened to the last episode, you heard Holly and I share about some of our favorite books and books we've been reading. And at the end, we told you that you definitely want to tune in to this episode, this first episode in the month of October 2022. So I'm really glad that you decided to take a listen today. What does it look like to show up for the people God has called you to serve and serve them wholeheartedly? And how can you build and maintain healthy, vibrant relationships in the midst of an instant reply culture? In our conversation today, Holly and I are speaking with Heather Thompson Day, and you are not going to want to miss 1 second of the conversation. Heather teaches in a university, so she is leading college students and serving them every day. She shares about her leadership journey and how her early experiences in school shaped who she has become. We dive into how to handle the challenge of feeling like it's never your turn and why it's important to be aware of your thoughts during these kinds of seasons of waiting. Heather also discusses why we must invest in relationships and how social media is changing things for us. We even dive into the issue of cancel culture and the concept of cutting people out of your life that we seem to be hearing so much about these days. One of our team members described this conversation as her favorite episode ever. So you're going to want to be sure to tune in and listen through the whole conversation. Now, before we dive in, let me share today's sponsor, which is my course, Confident Conversations. Being able to navigate tough conversations is part of having healthy relationships. But what if you struggle with what to say in these conversations or whether they're even necessary? I created Confident Conversations as a practical resource that will help you as you navigate initiating and leading hard conversations. You can grab it at confidentconversations.co or just go to the show notes and click the link in the show notes to find out more about the course and see if it's a good fit for you. All right, let's dive into our conversation with Heather Thompson Day. Welcome, Heather, to the podcast. We are really excited to be here with you today. So to kick us off, would you share just a little bit about yourself and your current leadership roles?
Yeah, I am a professor. I've been teaching communication for, I think, the last 12 years or so. And whenever somebody says, "Who are you?" I always say, I'm at my core a teacher and at my core a student. Those are two values that both exist at the same time within me. And so that's my leadership role. I also write books and I speak, but I think at my core, I'm really just a teacher.
I think that's crucial. Doesn't a teacher always have to be learning?
You would hope so, Holly.
Okay.
But I would not say that that is true for all people,
Okay.
But I actually am. So recently my therapist we've been talking about this, like, who are you without a title, right? Without the title of teacher, but I'm somebody that always loves to learn. And I've been that way. My daughter right now, she's like a little me. She sets her alarm. She's 10. She sets an alarm at 5 a.m. so she can read her Bible. And she has all these books. I mean, she reads, goes to the library all the time. That's how I was. I've always loved to learn. And so even if I wasn't getting paid to do it, I would still be doing it.
I think that that's a really big theme on the podcast here. We think that leaders are learners.
Yes.
And so that totally resonates with us and our listeners. And I'm constantly buying books and taking courses. So,
but I'm not sure about the 5 a.m. thing, Holly. I don't know if we're doing that
at 5 a.m. No. I wish I was a morning person, but I am so not. So
see, well, it actually is so crazy to me that some like one of my best friends, she's a therapist, and she wakes up and then just like jumps in the shower and goes. And I can't believe that she just gets up and gets ready. Like I sit. I set my alarm to just sit in the dark for at least 30 minutes before I do it. I just sit and stare and do nothing. And then I'm like, okay, Lord, now I'm going to pray. And then I'm going to have worship. And I'm going to ask myself, how are you feeling today, Heather? I'm a slow mover. And it's like part of my ritual every single morning. I cannot fathom just getting up and going.
That is my husband. His feet hit the ground running.
And he goes.
I just don't get it.
Wow.
Okay, so we would love to hear about your leadership journey and maybe when you realized you were a leader.
It's funny that you say that because my leadership journey has been very complicated, as I think it often is for women in Christianity, because I had leadership skills, I think, as a child that were not, instead of being like appreciated and cultivated, they were like, how do we get rid of her? Quite literally, I was expelled in 8th grade from my small town Christian school. And it's funny because I was in trouble all the time for like, I literally remember leaning back in my chair and they said it was vandalism of school property. And they wrote me a citation for it, just trying to get rid of me at this point. And then I went to the public school. And I remember at our parent teacher conference or whatever in 8th grade, my science teacher said to my mom, oh, tell the Christian school they can send us their bad kids anytime, because I never got in trouble again. And it was for the first time I was just allowed to be myself. So it's different probably for the denomination that I was in, but it was just my relationship with it is complicated so much so that I think my natural inclination is not ever to seek the spotlight, right? Because something in me says that's bad. That's not for you. So even the first time I spoke was not because I was trying to be a speaker by any means. My husband was a pastor and they asked me to come speak to middle school girls. And so I did that. And I can remember as I was doing it, just knowing there's something here, right? But it would be many years after that before all those things came into fruition. But I think in a lot of ways, leadership for me personally has not been something I've sought out. It's been a calling that keeps coming, but it's not something even right now, as I'm talking to you, I don't know that I want to lead my students. I feel very clear on that. I'm not somebody who has a massive desire to lead on like an epic scale, because I have friends who do that and do that so well. And I see what happens to them. And I'm sensitive, right? Like I don't want everybody to be talking about me on their blogs and hurting my feelings. I get enough DMs as it is. Like I can't fathom experiencing that on a 1,000,000-person scale. So I think still probably from childhood, there's a lot of stuff that I need to work out in therapy that's just like resisting that part of myself that I think is also still naturally, innately who God probably created me to be. But how do we accept that when so many people have told us it's bad for you?
Yeah. I think a lot of women listening right now are probably resonating with what you just shared, several parts of your story, including the part of not necessarily seeking the role or the spotlight or anything like that, but just that continual call to step into something that God puts in front of you.
Right.
Yeah.
To fill the gap that you see. And I think women often do that so well.
Yeah. So I'd love to just dig a little more into your role as a professor, because we have never talked to a professor, I don't think. Like you're the first professor we've spoken to. And I'd love to hear about your passion for your students and how you seek to lead them well in that role.
So, I think we often serve really well in the places that we weren't served. And so again, because I had such a struggle often in my Christian education experiences, it is so important to me to serve really well my students who are in a Christian education experience. I teach at a Christian school, and I have for the last 6 or so years. I spent many years in the public school higher education system and actually really loved it and did well there. But I do feel called right now to this Christian space to create other leaders, right? Instead of just pulling weeds so people can breathe, I feel like in Christian education often, and not because we're better than anyone, but we often just have a lot more tools or resources available. Kids have been used to leading in church, which actually makes a very big difference, especially in my field, communication. It is very normal for Christian kids to get up and just nail a public speech. Whereas in the public school system, why was I speaking? Where was I ever even testing that? Even if it's a gift of mine, I didn't have avenues really to test that unless I was the class president, and there's only one, right? Whereas in Christian schools, I think we give kids lots of opportunities to explore that part, which is very important to me. So I just really feel called to serve them and help equip them and prepare them and mentor them and tell them I see you. I never had a teacher until I was in college that pulled me aside and said, I see you. I had incredible parents. So much of my life is really just like a reflection of the excellent parenting that I had. But I never had, you know, people tell those stories about like that one teacher that changed my life. I didn't have that. And so I want to be that because one thing I know is education has changed my life. The availability and the tools and the resources education has given me has been life-changing. And I hate to think that there are young people who are dropping out of school simply because nobody held their hand on the day that they really just needed an adult to see them and hold their hand, right? Because they're 18 and they're 19 and they're terrified and they think they're not supposed to be here. Let me give an example. So I just had a student, I think it was yesterday. She wanted to switch her major and she stopped up at our department and she was like, I'm looking for the art department and I really want to change my major to art, but I want to talk to somebody. And I think often, at least from what I hear from students, is somebody will say, okay, go right, go left, walk down the sidewalk, and there's the art department. And for a lot of, I'm not saying this is good. I'm saying the reality is a lot of our kids right now, if there's no one there to hold their hand, they just won't go. So they will have gotten the courage to go up and ask for help. And then when you point them in the direction and walk away, they're like, well, maybe this isn't for me, or this feels really difficult, or maybe I shouldn't have even done this. And they go back to their dorm. I believe in taking the time to walk the student down the stairs to the art department, to the door, and then passing them to the next person. That's just my own personal, I feel like, calling and responsibility. And my hope is that by doing that, at least in the spaces that I can, more people are going to stay in school who would have perhaps been overwhelmed by little things, like something happens at the bookstore. And then it doesn't take much, I'm telling you, for these kids to feel like, well, then I'm not supposed to be here. I had a student on her senior year. She came to my office and said, I'm going to have to drop out because I'm not financially cleared. Her senior year. She was like, it's fine. I have a job. It's like, it doesn't matter. And I was like, no, let's go have a meeting with the financial aid department. Give me your hand. We're walking across campus. I take her to the financial aid building. She graduates, but she was about to drop out because she wasn't financially cleared. And right now people are so overwhelmed and so stressed. Studies show that Americans say I've never been more exhausted than I am today. And it doesn't take much for a 19, 20, 21-year-old kid to say, I quit. Can't do this anymore. So if we as adults and teachers and professors and staff can just hold their hand and walk them, I say, let's do it.
What a really good lesson in leadership, right? Like, I think sometimes we feel like, well, I've given you all the resources. Why aren't you taking hold of them? Why aren't you realizing your potential? And I think that if we had some people who were just walking with us a few steps,
wow,
we could really take off, right? And so I love that you're talking about this. And I love that you are that person for them. I think sometimes we need a champion who's going to just fight for us a little bit because we are afraid to fight for ourselves. And so that really gets me thinking about leadership lessons. And I'm wondering if there are any leadership lessons that you've learned along the way as you've gotten to this point in your journey and in your influence over your students.
Yeah, two that come to mind right away, even as I hear you say that. One that my mentor told me, this is probably 2 years ago, is he said, Heather, assume the role. Wherever you see yourself 10 years from now, you don't wait to develop those characteristics. You assume the role today. If you think 10 years from now, you're going to be somebody with really healthy relationships and healthy boundaries who prioritizes your family, you don't wait till 10 years from now to become that person. You assume the role today. And if you think that 10 years from now, you're going to be somebody who is leading and taking charge of conversations and bridge building and peacekeeping and all that stuff, you assume the role today. Don't wait. And so that's a piece of advice that I really took to heart. And I can see 2 years later how much fruit it's borne, because once the door of opportunity opens for you, it's almost too late, right? To develop the strategies, the tools that you didn't develop before. And so assuming the role before the opportunity ever comes, just living your life as if it's coming, has changed the intentionality by which I walk. And I think the other thing, again, my mentor, I have a really fantastic mentor now I've been with him for, I think, 4 years, and he has just taught me so much. But one of the first things he said to me was, what if you don't need more talent or skills? What if you really just need more experience? And he said, you'll get there quicker if you slow down. And at that point in my life, I remember just almost crying when he said it, because I'm somebody that often I struggle with this feeling of that I'll never be good enough, right? Like no matter, I'm an achiever, I'm an Enneagram 3. So I always struggle with this concept of you have to do more. And I always look and compare myself to people that I should not truly be comparing myself to, because they're in a totally different league than me. Right. And then I feel like I'm behind, but I'm not. I'm where Heather, should be. Right. I don't have to be that person. But just slowing down and saying, you know what I really need right now is not like to become better or to become more. I just need more experience. And I get experience by actually walking and living and doing my job that I'm doing right now, by really just fully surrendering to the process of what is here, right here in front of me. That's how I gain the experience to be who I think I'm going to be 10 years from now. So fully stepping into that space.
Those are such amazing lessons. And I feel like there's almost this tension between what you just shared of thinking about that, assuming the role of where you want to be in the future, but then also embracing right where you are and just living in the moment and getting the experience that will lead you to that future. So it's a beautiful picture of how we can lead well. So I heard you speak at She Speaks, and that's, where we met and encountered each other and what sparked my desire to have you on the podcast. And one of the things that I wrote down that you said, which really ties into what you were just sharing, is who you are when it is not your turn is more important than who we are when it is. Mm-hmm. And so I was wondering if you could just unpack that statement a little more and share a bit about that idea of who you are when it's not your turn.
Yeah. I came to a place in my life where I just remember having this conversation with my friend Tatiana on my campus. And she said to me, Heather, your God is too big. And I said, huh? Like, he's a great big God. That's what we sing. That's what we say. Of course, my God is big. She said, no, my God is small. She said, you think God is only going to start caring when you get to some metaphorical there. She said, my God is small, and he's as much a part of this breakfast as he is when I'm teaching a class or speaking. She had been a chaplain at Princeton University. When I'm leading students to Christ at Princeton, like, my God is small. And that was a wake-up call for me, that my life started like right here at the breakfast I was at, or it was actually a lunch. And so I walked across my campus. I just remember being like, my anointing begins the day I believe I have one. And so I walked into my class, and it was a class after lunch. I had like probably 6 students, and their heads were on their desk. Didn't look like they wanted to be there. And typically I would have walked into a situation like that, read the room, and been like, you know what, I'm just going to take it easy. Let's get through the points they want to get through, and I'll let them out. And I just didn't, because I had just had lunch with Tatiana, and I said, no, I'm anointed to be here. This is what God has placed in my hand, is these 6 kids whose heads are on their desk right now. And so I'm going to teach this class as if it's the most important thing I'm ever going to do in my entire life. And I did. And I remember afterward, this girl, she said, can I go to your office? And she came to my office and she said, I just want to thank you. And I can't even remember what it was, but she said, you said something in the lecture that is the answer to the prayer I've been asking God to direct me on for like the last 6 months. So I just want to say thank you. And I remember when she walked away, I was like, what if I had just phoned it in? Like, what if I hadn't walked into that opportunity as if it really mattered? And so since that day, that was probably 4 years ago, I have tried to step into every opportunity that I step into with that self-talk beforehand, saying, this is the most important thing you're ever going to do in your, this right now with Esther and Holly, you are on Good Morning America. This is the most important conversation you are going to have all day. So show up. And I live my life that way. And what I've gained, and for a long time, like nothing changed as far as opportunities open for me, but I changed. It genuinely changed me. And it changed the ways the conversations would transpire with my students. I could just see this shift. And I realized so many of us are waiting for our lives to matter. Like everybody does a podcast when there's 200,000 downloads. Like that doesn't take character and it doesn't take integrity and it doesn't mean that you're special because anybody would do that. It takes character and integrity to show up and hit record and keep going for 200 listeners. That is what character looks like. And I really feel like God is in need of a generation of people who are showing up to what he has placed in their hands as if it's the most important thing they'll ever do because they know that it matters, right? They're doing it because of the work, not because of the applause. And I just think that's a character trait and skill that I really want my students to be able to receive because I think we're missing it. I know I was missing it.
Yeah, I think that goes back to something we talked about sort of at the beginning 4 years ago when we were doing this podcast about self-leadership. You know, so many people want to lead others, but they're afraid to lead themselves.
So good.
Because I don't know about you, but like I'm the most unruly person like to myself. Like, you know what I mean? I'm not going to listen to what I want to do. I'm going to do whatever. And when it is the most crucial, that's when we need to be leading ourselves. And so I love that you're talking about this. But I do think as you were talking, like we have so many women listening that are probably in a season of waiting. Mm-hmm. And they may be waiting for God to give them their turn for their promotion or for the next leadership or to start a business. And so I would love for you to talk to that person who feels like it never seems to be her turn. And she's getting really tired of waiting for whatever it is, God to do something or something in her to change or an opportunity. And she's just tired. Can you talk to her and tell her what you think she needs to hear?
Yeah, I think like what I just said, I think when we stop looking at what we don't have and we start saying, okay, but what do I have, right? It's a perception switch. What do I have? How can I be faithful to this thing? I mean, Martin Luther King did a graduation speech. It was shortly before he was killed. And he says to this group of seniors, Black kids in the middle of the civil rights movement, who it's not like they're marching off to opportunity. And he says to them, if all you'll ever do when you leave here is be a street sweeper, then I want you to sweep those streets with so much passion and so much integrity and so much intentionality that all of heaven has to stop and say, oh my God, look at the street sweeper. What would it look like if we showed up to our marriages or our children or our office places or our schools in that way with so much passion and integrity and intentionality that at least like forget who's watching you here, that heaven, which is always watching, has to stop and say, do you see her? Do you see what she's doing with what she has? And I just think more of us have to stop thinking about what we're waiting on and start thinking about what we have right now, because it's always going to be, it's actually in communication, it's called the focusing illusion. There's this study they did where they asked, I hope I don't mess this up, but they asked college students, they said, how happy are you? how many dates did you have in the last month? And they found that there was zero correlation to how happy people were and how many dates they had in the last month. And then they decided, let's switch the questions. Let's first ask them, how many dates did you have in the last month? Oh, by the way, how happy are you? All of a sudden, they found a very strong correlation between how happy someone was and how many dates they had in the last month. Nothing has changed except their focus. We have to be very careful with our minds about where we focus. And I'm somebody that will do certain things are just thought patterns that are automatic in my brain. And so I have to just challenge it and not shame myself for thinking it. Oh, you're doing it again. You're worrying about the future. No, I just say, hey, you thought like that for a very long time, Heather, but that doesn't serve you anymore. What do you have? Let's look there. And I just talk to my brain as if it's like this outside external entity. And it has been so helpful for me in just interrupting negative thoughts that would usually cause me to spiral, because negative thinking is self-perpetuating and it just spirals you down more negative thoughts. And it is wild how quickly your body physiologically responds to the words you say to yourself. This is my area that I teach. Within milliseconds, when you say negative things to yourself, your body responds like that. So we have to be very careful with the words we say because our brains are listening to us. So that's what I would say to somebody.
Wow. This is so good. So you said this is your area that you teach. So I'm just going to dig deeper into this.
Yeah.
What are some of the practical ways that we can maybe change those thought patterns? And how does that impact us in how we live out our lives?
Okay. The number one thing that I would say is you are not your thoughts. Just like I can't make my blood stop circulating right now. Your brain is constantly taking in, it is like millions of pieces of data every single second. And thoughts are they're just going to happen to you. And it doesn't mean that that's who you are. So you have to get really good at when a thought arises, not shaming yourself. At least this is what I do. I will have a thought that I'm like, I thought we were past this, Heather. Are you serious? You haven't changed at all. You're still the same old Heather. And that's what I would usually do. I have had to learn what we call in communication to interrupt a negative thought. So the thought comes and I say, first of all, Heather, you are not your thoughts. And here's how I would challenge that thought that just came up. I would say there's always energy, right? Like thoughts are energy and emotions are energy. What do you do with it? You have to do something with the energy because it's looking for a place to go. So what your body wants to do is just spiral down into it. Most people don't know this. Your brain is wired in the negative. It's actually a survival mechanism. You look for things to go wrong. So when people tell me like, oh, I'm positive, it's not true. Like all of us are negative. You train your brain to be positive. It's actually a skill. So one thing I would say for somebody listening that they could do right now is write down 3 positive things. What are 3 things right now that are doing well, that are going well, that you feel like, you know what, I'm thriving in this particular area, or I'm doing well here. Make your brain force it to acknowledge those things. If you do this every single day in just 6 weeks, just writing down 3 things that went well in just 6 weeks, it reduces depression and anxiety. 6 weeks. And in 6 weeks, without you telling your brain to do it, it will automatically then start generating positive things for you without you stopping to even ask it to. But you have to take ownership and take control and start creating the habit.
I guess the word that sort of came to my mind while you were talking about that, or sort of the statement, was no wonder I feel like such a victim to my brain. Like, that sounds terrible, but like, right? If it's wired negatively and it's telling me all these things, no wonder I feel like a victim to it, because it takes that step of being like, no, this is not going to happen anymore. And when a victim becomes a survivor, it's that, no, this is not going to happen anymore. And so I just find it so interesting. That's all I could think of when you were talking, is we become so much a victim to our thoughts. And I think that is such a strong thing in leadership. Like if we are becoming a victim to our thoughts, then how do we expect people who are following us to not do that as well? And we have to be the role model in that situation. And I guess, I don't know, I don't have a question in that. That's all I could think of when you were talking.
But you know what you were saying earlier about self-leadership, the more we focus on what can I do for, sometimes when I'm having a bad day, I have said, okay, what are 3 things I can do for other people today? And one's like to bring coffee to the girl that runs our front desk, right? Another one might be to just tell my coworker, hey, I've noticed, and these are things I do. I've noticed that you've been working really late. I just want you to know I saw you and I appreciate all the work that you put into this department. Then when I go home, nothing has changed for me, but I feel better just knowing I'm still useful, even when it feels like I'm waiting on something or something hasn't come that I'm waiting on, but I can still make a difference for the people around me. What can we do with what we have? And the more we focus on other people, the less our own problems feel like they're overtaking us. The more we focus on ourselves, the bigger and bigger and bigger our problems become. So sometimes the antidote is just to say, I'm going to take a break from me for the day. What are 3 things I can do for somebody else?
So refreshing.
Yeah.
I love that. And yeah, it's so true. I feel like this is like conversations that I have with my daughter, who is 13. And we talk about that idea of like, we have to shift our focus onto some of the positive things, what is going well. Because especially in the younger teen years, and I'm sure even into college, it's so easy for that to spiral out of control.
Right.
So one of the statements that I sometimes hear from our listeners, and I know that I have felt this way too, as a Christian woman in leadership, is I just don't have time for friendships. I don't have time for relationships, or it's just very lonely in leadership. It's lonely trying to do this thing in business or whatever it might be. And so I'm thinking that is kind of one of those negative thoughts that we buy into. And it is challenging to build strong relationships as leaders. But I know that this is something you're passionate about, is that we need each other and that we need relationships. So could you speak to this idea of why it is so important for us to prioritize relationships?
The number one thing I would say is this is where evolutionary biology and Christianity both agree. You are wired and created to exist in relationship with other people. Unfortunately, you don't have a choice. When we look at the quality of our lives and we say, I have a good life, I just need a better job, or I have a good life, I just need to make more money, or I have a good life, I just need to meet somebody. What we are really saying is, I have healthy relationships with other people. Because when we have healthy relationships with other people, our brain can compartmentalize where life is wrong. When we don't have healthy relationships with other people, we say things like, I hate my life. I can't do this anymore. I don't know how to get out of bed in the morning. And we don't realize what we are actually saying is, I don't have anyone. This isn't optional. Self-reliance is a myth. You have to have relationships with other people. It has to become a priority. It's the greatest contributor to your happiness, outranking how much money you make, the car you drive, the school you went to, how successful you are, is your relationships with other people. Even in here, for those of us who are leaders in offices, the most important thing to whether somebody stays working is not even like the job that they have. It's the people they work with, because human beings are wired relationally. And I would say this, especially for Christians, if God himself does not exist outside of relationship, outside of the Trinity, what should that say to you? We are made in the image of God. And so therefore, we are supposed to exist in relationship with other people. The very first thing for the Lord's Prayer, when they say, Father, teach us how to pray, the first thing he says is, our Father. Every time you pray, you're supposed to be reminded that you are not alone. It's not my God. This is our Father. No matter where I am, no matter what situation I find myself in, the second I say our Father, I know that there are other people in this with me. I'm a part of this cosmic family of kingdom builders. I just think Christians should be leading this charge because our world is just dying and desperately in need of each other. And the devil has been so good at dividing us from one another. And it's especially, my goodness, for the church, like this isn't optional. We have got to figure out, how do I prioritize my relationships? And here's what I would say. It feels really good. And I know this because I do it. It feels really good when I'm overwhelmed and stressed to go home and watch like 5 episodes of Survivor in a row. It does. It feels really good. Right. But what would feel better is if I went to lunch with my best friend, Scarlett. When I'm driving home from work, it doesn't feel like that. My brain says, no, you just want to go numb, not think. But the reality is, and everybody knows this, you have one day, you can be at your wit's end. You spend one day with 3 people who desperately love you, and everything in the world looks different when you come out of that one meal. It's wild how I have been like, I'm financially hurting. I am emotionally exhausted. I don't know how to do this anymore. And I go to one lunch with my parents and my sister, and I am like, wow, is the sun shining brighter? Things just look new. And all that's happened is I've experienced relationship because I'm created for it. We have to make time for it.
So you have a new book called I'll See You Tomorrow, Building Relationship Resilience When You Want to Quit. And I think this is really important. I think we're going to get into this in a minute, but can you tell us what relational resilience is and what it actually looks like? Because I'm thinking that we're not good at this anymore.
This is because of my job. I'm especially concerned with the next generation. Because unfortunately, I think what's being modeled for them, and it's like, we need both. My therapist would say, this is a both and, right? Like, we are being taught how to walk away and knowing when to leave. And that is good. There are absolutely situations in which we need to do that. But the reality, I am of the belief that most people are doing the best they can with the tools they have. When I get offline, online, it feels like, oh my goodness, this world, this is a dumpster fire. Like, this is irreparable. But then I'm in a class with 30 college students and I meet real people face to face. And I'm like, oh my goodness, God, there's so much beauty in your people. There is so many people really trying to do the best they can with the tools they have. And so my hope is that relational resilience looks like using the tools that sometimes we already know, but how do I actually apply these to my lives? How is the case made that there's value for me here? We talk a lot about knowing when to leave. I want to talk to people about how can we stay? How do you say to somebody, you know what? Let's pause this conversation because I'm feeling myself get upset. And we know that once the emotional stuff happens in the brain, it's like, just so you know, for communication, it actually shuts down your brain's ability to think, right? So I'm getting emotional right now. Can we pause this conversation? I'm going to walk away, but I value you and I value this relationship. So I'll see you tomorrow. We are going to come back to this and hopefully with some better tools and a clearer thought, but I value you. We have to train our young people how to have these conversations because right now it is like the first thing you do that's offensive to me. And guess what? People are going to offend you. Because we're all hurting. We're all broken right now. We're all exhausted. I'm going to snap. I'm going to say something I shouldn't have said, right? How do we train ourselves to say, this was an incident. It wasn't a pattern. There's a difference. And I think right now we treat every single incident as if it's a pattern and that is who you are. But none of us are one incident. I know I'm not, right? So how do we extend that grace to other people? And the last thing I'll say on this for those of us that are like, and I'm not talking about actual toxic people, but I think that's a whole other conversation. We are using the word toxic as if everybody's toxic. It's not true. Most of us are doing the best with the tools that we have. How do we train an entire generation to apologize face to face? Most of my students, I'm serious about this. I'm starting to ask myself, how many of these young people have never had somebody apologize to their face? When they get an apology, it's a text message. Imagine the difference. This is what I say to my students in a communication class. There is a massive difference between a parent sending you an email and saying, I am so proud of you and all that you have accomplished. You have made your mom and I so proud. We are so glad that you exist. Okay, that's nice. And that's what most of us are doing all the time, by the way, right now. There's a really big difference between My dad, I can think of this moment where my dad came and he knocked on my door. I had just called off my engagement and he came and he sat on my bed and I'm sobbing. And I was like, Dad, I don't want to talk because I didn't. And my dad said, neither do I. And he just sat there on my bed until I fell asleep. Right? There is a difference between typing, I'm sorry, and going up to somebody, looking them in the eyes and saying, I'm sorry. We are physiologically wired to respond to those two things very differently. And I think we have a lot of people going through life because it's easier and it's going to avoid the conflict. And I'm already exhausted. I'm just going to type this text to you and hope that you'll receive it instead of knocking on the door. May Christians at least lead the charge in knocking on the door and saying, you know what, I got this one wrong. And I'm looking you in the eyes and I'm really sorry. There's so much restorative power in something like that.
I'm amening silently all the things that you're saying. And I have so many follow-up questions that I want to ask you, but I know I can't ask them all. But I think I want to just go down that road a little more around this issue of the social media and the texting and how is that impacting this issue of cutting people off and canceling people. And like, as someone who studies communication, I don't know what the question is truly, other than just if you have any thoughts on the impact that the way we are communicating in our current culture is having on the ability to just do what you just described and cut people off or cancel or say, I'm done with you, because you don't have to have that face-to-face conversation to do that anymore.
Yeah, I would say it's about the same as a salesman trying to sell you something by sending you a text or a DM. How easy is it for you to ignore that pitch? As opposed to somebody there's a theory, it's called foot in the door. And in communication, everybody knows if I can get my foot inside your door, I can sell you this vacuum, right? I got to get one foot inside your door. And what happens is that human to human, you're a real person now. I can't just edit, delete, block. This is a real human being. And I'm physiologically responding to all of that is you. You want to know what happens even just when we talk in person? Our brains start mirroring the other person. This is fascinating. So just by sitting and saying, how's your day? Oh man, here's what I'm struggling with. My face actually starts making the same facial expressions as you. That's what happens when we have conversations. And that's how then what we would call empathy, it sends messages to your brain to say, oh, they're feeling sad. And the person never said that they were sad, but your brain is automatically picking up on it because your body starts mirroring the person that you're talking to. This is how communication works. And we have to be so careful because we're robbing our brain of all of the tools that it usually uses, especially to navigate conflicts, right? So just a second ago, I was at breakfast with a friend and he was having an issue with his boss. And he was like, so how do I respond? And what his boss had said was like, it was just ridiculous. And he was like, how do I respond? I said, well, first of all, we're not responding in the text. You're going to go to his office and have a conversation because I promise you it will change the way the conversation goes. It's just your brain is taking in all of these other things. You're not having to guess whether or not they're angry because I'm looking at your face. And it is so much harder to be angry when I'm looking at a real human being in their face, right? So I just say social media is, and I use it. I have a podcast called Viral Jesus. I love social media, but it's a tool. It is not supposed to be a substitute for a relationship. It's just not. It is a tool that we can use to keep relationship going, but I think we've been using it for a very long time as an actual substitute for our relationships. And just physiologically, there's no app for relationship. It doesn't work like that.
I'm so glad that you said that because I think someone just needs to tell us that.
Right?
We try to do that. And especially when, you talked about the whole like driving home and I just want to sort of bug out or numb out. It's so much easier to connect with people through a scroll on a screen than it is to have someone sitting right in front of you. And so I'm so glad that you said that because I think that we need to hear it. One of the things I think I've been noticing on social media is this idea of the fact that people are not bringing value to your life. And I think that there's a piece of this that is part of this whole conversation of cutting people out. And the idea or the threshold is if they're not bringing value to your life or they're not adding or they're not doing exactly what you think they need to do, that's when it's time to cut someone out. And so I'm wondering, first of all, if you could give us your thoughts on that. But what do we need to actually do instead of cutting someone out? Or how do we evaluate those relationships in such a way that we see what it's truly like, but yet we choose to stay resilient, or we choose to still continue to show up? So how do we do that?
Yeah. So a big thing that I talk about, and I'll see you tomorrow, is this concept of weak ties. What we call it in communication is it's called weakening the tie. It is not that you don't have value as a human being, and it does not mean that you don't have dignity, right? But I'm going to weaken our tie, but you are still an important person. Does that make sense? And here's actually what most people don't know is our weak ties actually are a greater contributor to our happiness than our most close interpersonal relationships, which I think is very fascinating. So there is value in, I said, I went to breakfast this morning with a coworker. The lady who runs the diner that I went to breakfast at, her name is Shirley. And when I haven't seen Shirley most of the summer because my kids have been home. And so I haven't gone to breakfast near my work because I don't live in this town. And I walked in and she said, "Oh my goodness, Heather, I've been thinking about you." And I just literally 2 weeks ago, I was like, "Why hasn't she been here? Where is she? Is she going to come back?" And I said, "Shirley, I'm back. I'm so excited." She said, "You want your usual?" I said, "Do you remember my usual?" She said, "Yes, I do." And she said it to me. And I said, "Oh my goodness, you remember." I said, "Shirley, and I'll be back next week." Shirley is a weak tie to me. But every time I see her, we have an interaction and a conversation. And guess what? Weak ties are actually incredibly valuable to your brain. So we tend to say it's quality over quantity. Weak ties would say that that's actually not true, that I can have a healthy social life, even if I don't have a best friend. If I just start valuing all the weak tie, it's the conversation again of stop looking at what I don't have and start saying, but what do I have? And how do I act like these actually have value? So many of my students are like stressed because they don't have a best friend. And it's like a best friend is like a lightning bolt, right? Like that's not, I don't think that that's something that we should all just expect to find. And I think like culture has made it where this is just normal. You have to have a best friend. It should be probably hard and unusual to find another person that like I want to go through every single day of my life with. But it is not hard or unusual to have a lot of weak ties that I have value with and I have fun and we can go out to eat once a month and I value you. And how do I start telling my brain, this is an important relationship. These people matter. Weak ties are actually as beneficial, and some research would say more beneficial than our close personal ties.
That is fascinating. I have never heard that, and it's so intriguing. So I'm excited to read your book and dig in more to that. So I want to follow up with this last question. Is there ever a time when it's appropriate to end a relationship? And if so, is there a healthy way of doing that?
I mean, again, that would be like a context question, right? Mm-hmm. The number one thing I would say is we always look for patterns. What is the pattern? Is this person consistently hurting my feelings? This isn't an incident. This is every single time I'm talking to this person, they're trying to do something that would hurt my feelings or trying to do something that they know is going to upset me. They're constantly crossing a boundary that I've already vocalized. I don't like this. This makes me uncomfortable. Please don't do that. And then they keep stepping over it. And then I think a good thing to ask yourself, I can't even remember. I saw I think it was a therapist on Instagram and she said this and I thought, oh, that's so good. She said, what can I say yes to? So the answer isn't to just say, okay, what can I say no to? Because there's always things your brain's going to say no to, right? But what can I, in this weak tie relationship now with this person, as I weaken the tie because I'm recognizing that there's some patterns here, what can I say yes to? So maybe it's unhealthy. This person says to me, I'm sick and I need you to come over and bring me dinner. I can't say yes to that because that's an unsafe space for me at this point. But can I say yes to ordering them a DoorDash meal? The answer to that may be yes, right? And I just think we have to be careful because we are living our lives as if everybody's unsafe. And I'm just telling you, it's not true, right? Like some people might not have good tools of communication. And so their communication is a bit harsh, but everybody is not an actual physical threat. And I think we're starting to talk as if everybody is a physical threat to me. And there is this link in our brain, between our emotions and our physical, right? So I think that's where it comes from. But you have to respond to your brain and say, is this person actually going to physically hurt me? Maybe that answer is yes. Then of course, like, don't even send them food, right? But if this person is just kind of annoying, they're annoying. Right. But I'm not physically threatened. So it is appropriate then in this case, because this is a human being. And I promise you, this is a child of God. It might be appropriate then in that situation to say, what can I say yes to in this relationship? I'm not going to go on a walk with you, but I can send you a DoorDash. So let me be faithful to that, because that's how I'm faithful to God. When we honor the image of God in the other person, we honor God himself. And that's really important.
So where do I sign up for your class?
Yes, I would love that. I would love that.
We're both moving to wherever you live, and we're just going to come sit in your class every day. We're going to audit it. So
would be thrilled.
So as Esther said, I know we could talk forever about this because I still have a million questions rolling around in my head, but we do have to wrap up. So a question that we ask everyone, because I think it's so important, and I alluded to this earlier, we believe that leaders are learners. And so we know that our guests usually have really great resources that they are tapping into. So if you have a book or a podcast or another resource that you've been learning from recently, we'd love to hear what that is, if you would be willing to share it.
Oh, a book I think every person should read is The Gifts of Imperfection, Brené Brown. I'm doing right now Social Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. It's a fantastic book. The Good Shepherd by Kenneth Bailey I'm reading right now. I just finished it's Sermon on the Mount. Sermon on the Mount by Amy Jill Levine. And it was so good. She's Jewish and she's talking about the Sermon on the Mount from a Jewish perspective.
That sounds so interesting.
It was so good.
Awesome. We will make sure those resources are linked up in the show notes. So Heather, as we wrap up, I just want to thank you for being with us. And where can people connect with you? Because I know they're going to want to. And if there's anything, a resource or a book or anything you want to point them to, feel free to share that as well.
Yeah. So my latest book is called I'll See You Tomorrow. You can get it wherever books are sold. You can find me at heatherthompsonday.com, and I'm on Instagram as Heather Thompson Day. I'm on Twitter as Heather Today, but I haven't been on Twitter because I'm afraid of it right now. So I've stepped back from a little bit until things calm down, and then I may put my toe back in the water. But right now I'm mainly on Instagram.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being with us today, Heather.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us on the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, would you consider leaving us a rating and review in your podcast app? This helps more women just like you find the podcast. And it also helps them to know whether the podcast would be a good fit for them. Just go to the show in your podcast app, then scroll down until you see the option for ratings and reviews. From there, you can tap to rate and write a review. It means the world to us when you take a couple minutes to do this. And thank you so much to everyone who has left a review. Now, don't forget, your leadership matters, and it's time for you to embrace your gifts and lead with confidence.